Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Talking Pictures. I'm your host, Tim Rosenberger, and today we're going to be talking about the Best Picture Oscar nominees for this year. To do that, I've brought back my friend Blake, who came and did this last year. Blake, thanks for coming back.
Absolute pleasure. This will be the first time I've been able to go through all of the nominees sort of in depth. I've done a lot of quick hits here and there, maybe done one or two at a time, but being able, I think, to sit down and go through all of them is going to be a very, it's going to be pretty therapeutic. I think I'm going to come away from this like ready to predict the Oscars as opposed to just think about all these movies all at once.
Well, speaking of predicting things, I wanted to start off talking about, did you predict what happened last year with the whole kerfuffle of the announcement of who won with the whole La La Land Moonlight thing? What was your reaction to that whole thing?
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone could have predicted it going down that way. And if they did, they probably made a killing in Vegas. But if I were to explain like how I viewed everything happening, like where was I? What was I doing? Every year I go to an Oscar party, and every year we all, we do the normal stuff. There's like an Oscar bingo thing. So like if somebody says something, you mark it, and then you can win prizes. And usually it's like movie candy or a little like gift bag of movies or something. But then everybody also fills out an Oscar ballot. So then you're like cemented before the broadcast starts. And I remember marking Moonlight as Best Picture. I think I said on this podcast, I was like, Moonlight is the best picture of the year. And maybe the Academy won't give it the award. Maybe it'll go to La La Land because that is a technical achievement in every way. It's a very charming film. I think that it is that love letter to Los Angeles, which is, where a lot of the Academy's goings on emanate from. But Moonlight to me was, is, and always will be the best picture of the year in that case. So I was like, all right, cool. And, like the whole broadcast goes on and the basic stuff I knew, but Best Picture last year was a tough category. So I was like, nah, it's going to be Moonlight. It's going to be Moonlight. And then, of course, they announced La La Land. Everybody at the party is like cheesing me a little bit because I put Moonlight. Everybody else, for the most part, put La La Land, except for a few who went with me on Moonlight. And I was like, nah, it wasn't. It wasn't the Best Picture of the year. And then, of course, the stage hands are walking up. And then Warren Beatty has that awkward moment where he's like, I just read what was on the thing. And then the producer of La La Land says, no, Moonlight, get up here. You guys won Best Picture. And I just sat there and I was like, at no point have I ever been so happy to be right about the Oscars. Like, they did it right. So that I thought was a little bit personal because I was sitting there like, no, I'm just shaking my head. And then, of course, it had that WWE, that's Stone Cold Steve Austin's music. And here he comes with a steel chair to like let you know what's going to happen. And then that's so, like, obviously, I hope it's not that theatrical this year. I hope that the movie that wins is the one that wins. But yeah, last year was that was a doozy, man. I think that would have been a nightmare for anybody who bets on the Oscars, which I don't. And I think that it would have been a lot of fun to watch people get really upset over what went down. Because to be honest with you, like I said, I don't think anybody could have predicted that.
No, and for all of the categories that happened to, the fact that it happened with the last one, the biggest one of the night, I think that's the only time that's ever happened to my knowledge, anyway, at least on that scale. I was watching it with some friends at their house, and they had recorded it,
Right.
so we weren't watching it in real time, so I was off social media when that was going on. But then my wife, after they announced La La Land initially, she went on Facebook.
Right.
She thought, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about hearing anything before we see it. And then she just saw Facebook and she was like, oh, okay. And then she was pointing stuff out to me as it was happening. So I was somewhat prepared for, I was like, no, they didn't do that, did they? And then and then it's like, oh yes, they did. Because at first I thought when Warren Beatty was, I thought he was just kind of milking the moment or something. I didn't know that he was
Right.
having trouble. But yeah, the whole thing was just crazy. It is sad for the Moonlight people to a degree. I mean, the movie won Best Picture, but like some people were pointing out at the time, they didn't get the exhilaration of we won. I mean, they kind of did, but they also had the, oh, we feel really bad for the La La Land people who thought they won and then it was taken away from them. And the La La Land producer guy handled it, I think, as well as you could.
I was also kind of down for the Moonlight crew because it's like, look, sort of the magic of being at the Oscars and winning Best Picture is when they say, and the nominees are, and then you are the one that was selected. But not to make it about me, it's really not why I say this, but I was sitting at this party like, no, La La Land was not better than Moonlight, and you can't convince me otherwise. And then, of course, while I'm sitting there being an obstinate little shit, to say the least, then I get told that I'm correct. And at the same time, I'm like, yes, no, that's wonderful for that film because it it really did hit me. And I'm one of those people who, like, at the time of year when, I kind of plow through all of these movies, I'm really looking to be hit hard emotionally or to have a reaction to something. And Moonlight was the type of film that made me want to learn and think and open my mind. Whereas La La Land was, in every sense of the word, the proper form of escapism with a very strong final moments of the third act when it was bringing everything to resolution. And then there's that bittersweet element to the story with their relationship. But Moonlight was a movie that as soon as I finished watching it, I was like, that one's gonna stay with me. And it did. It was one of those things where I was like, that is a film that needs to be exalted a bit. Yeah, it won 3 Oscars: Best Motion Picture, Performance by an Actor, Mahershala Ali, and then Adapted Screenplay. So, I mean, for me, that's 3 Oscars. That's completely a sweep for a movie of its size, for a movie of its importance, when you're going up against a lot bigger films. And let's be honest, La La Land is a much bigger film. It wasn't a huge film. It wasn't the biggest film of the year, but it was a much bigger film in terms of scale and I think budget, certainly given the talent that they had. And at the same time, knowing that films like Moonlight probably would not have been given as much light of day prior to like the mid 90s, to know that we're not ignoring films like that and to know that they have a chance to win Best Picture and be the best picture of the year, I think is huge. I champion movies like that. Even if I don't think they're going to win Best Picture, I'm like, you know what? No. If you didn't see Moonlight, get out there and see it. Rent it, stream it, whatever you can, anything. And luckily, I didn't have to toot the horn too loud last year because it ended up winning in the end.
I do worry that, I mean, we'll probably never really know for sure that this type of thing, but the year before that, they had the whole Oscars so white thing.
Yeah.
Then the year right after that, predominantly African American film won. So, I mean, I do worry. I hope that people voted for it because they wanted to vote for it, not because of we have to vote for it to make us look good or something.
So they can change their image. Yeah. The concern you have is one that I share as well. I don't want them to just change their image because they're getting called out. I want them to award films that deserve it. But when it comes to the nomination process, I think they had cleared that hurdle already. And I think that they had a pretty decent amount of nominees for the year. And for me, the same goes for this year. I made the comment to somebody the other day, like, oh, I finally wrapped up seeing all the Best Picture nominees. And I thought, this is probably the best batch of 9 since they made the transition away from 5. I think this is probably one of the best batches of films to see because I think it plays to a lot of different sensibilities. I think it covers a wide variety of themes. I think that none of these films look like, just visually, I don't think any of them look similar to the other. Some are big, some are small, and small is not a bad word when you're describing films. But I think that if I were going to give the Academy marks for what I think is a good list of 9, up to 10, because that's how high they have gone, I'd say they knocked this batch out of the park. There were a couple of changes I might have made, but on the whole, I was like, you know what? This covers a pretty wide variety of films. The only 2 that I think are very similar are Dunkirk and Darkest Hour, because they take place during World War II, because they focus on the British military. But like thematically, they're drastically different films. Seeing where they've come from being called out a couple of years ago, I think the Academy's done a pretty good job of recognizing things that downright should be, but also not keeping a narrow point of view and when they pick and choose.
I was thinking about this just the other day because I think the key to this isn't so much let's just nominate African American films or films by women or whatever just to nominate them. The key to it is making sure that more of those movies get made and more of those people from those demographics get to make films, and then
Correct.
more will probably get nominated just out of the more of them will be around. So I think that's the key they're going for. I think the Academy's doing what they can. It's more on the studios, though, and the people who choose to finance these things. To what you said before, this is a very interesting stable of films that have been nominated. They are all very different from each other. Like you said, Dunkirk and Darkest Hour are probably the most similar, even though the style of them is totally different. So it's going to be nice to talk about them. So we can get into that here with the first film, Call Me By Your Name. It takes place in 1983. It follows a 17-year-old boy named Elio, played by Timothy Chalamet. He lives somewhere in northern Italy with his mother and father. His father, who's played by Michael Stuhlbarg, he invites an American graduate student named Oliver, who's played by Armie Hammer, up for the summer to help with some academic paperwork that he needs help with. From what they're saying in the film, I think this is a thing he's done multiple years. I think he probably is some sort of internship thing. They invite a student over every year to do that. So Elio is hesitant about Oliver, doesn't really seem to know what to think about him at first, but fairly quickly the two form a pretty strong bond, which blooms into a romance between the two. So I will admit for this one, while I think the premise of it is very interesting with this young boy discovering himself and all that. I'm not crazy about this one. Partially, it's the pacing of the film for me. It's a very
Okay.
kind of slow pacing of it that for me just went on and 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 on. And even at one point they fade to black and I thought that was going to be the end. And then they come back again. So I thought it went on too long. And also, it's just, I'm not really familiar with the other films this director has done. But for me, it wasn't directed or written or acted in a way that I found was interesting. Again, I found the story of it was fine, beyond the fact that the kid is 17, which I'm a bit uncomfortable with. But I don't know, I just didn't find the film terribly interesting. I think the best part of the film, for me, the only thing I really found interesting, because I'll admit I was pretty bored when watching this, was Michael Stuhlbarg has a speech near the end of the movie, which I enjoyed quite a bit. For most of the film, though, I don't know, I just felt like it plodded along, and it just did not appeal to me. So, I don't know, what were your thoughts about the film?
Well, I mean, I'll get the positives out of the way because I think the negatives just bring it lower and lower on like an overall ranking amongst its fellow nominees. Because
Yeah.
again, like that's what we're really here to do. We're not here to just review these movies and tear them apart or love on them. But for the most part, this is directed by Luca Guadagnino is his name. He is responsible for collaborating with Tilda Swinton on at least 3 films that I'm aware of. One of them is I Am Love. In 2015, he made a bigger splash and he made a movie called The Protagonists back in the late 90s with Tilda. So like his reputation with me is his films are very artistic. They're very beautiful. They're very photography heavy. He loves getting lost in his stories. And I don't mean lost in a bad way. I mean, he's very much enraptured in the stories that he's telling. The problem for me is that this film is from start to finish, it's characters. And if you don't fall in love with these characters or have enough questions about these characters, the movie's interest level starts to drop off as you watch more and more of it. And as you said, it felt like it plodded along. So before I go deeper into that, I want to say that the photography in this movie is some of the best I saw all year. If you've ever wanted to see what Italy looked like, this is a postcard from Northern Italy. That is the movie. I liked that it took place in 1983, which lends to a very interesting soundtrack at times, but it doesn't rely on 80s hits from 83 to like keep you pumped. That's not what it's about. This is about a group of intellectual people who are on this, what we would call a very beautiful estate in Northern Italy, and sort of just day to day what their lives are like for a period of about 6 weeks. And yes, Timothy Chalamet's character Elio, I took this to be a film about self-discovery. I felt that Armie Hammer did an admirable job as the confident American who comes and experiences a culture he's probably never really been a part of, but he's very educated on. And I think that their chemistry for me was not on par with some of the other nominees that we've seen this year, you know, like some of the duo moments or group moments we've seen. However, my biggest problem with it is that as I'm watching it, there really isn't, and I don't want to sound sophomoric when I say this, there really isn't a lot of damn conflict in the movie. As far as conflict compared to a lot of its other nominees, this is about a young man who is discovering that he may or may not be gay. Okay, yeah. That's the baseline premise of the film. And really, it's really him figuring out, as intellectual as he is, he's far beyond his peers in terms of intellectualism. Like, he is raised by a brilliant professor and an academic mother who is probably smarter than anyone we've ever met in our lives. Like, that's how brilliant they are. He is not kept on a short leash. So he's able to figure out who he is at a much younger age than most people are. And in the end, like, for me, he grows up in what I would consider, if you're a young man who is, or woman, who's battling with, do I come out? Do I not come out? Am I gay? Am I straight? Like, I don't know what I am. He lives in the most supportive environment for someone like that. An academic person who's seen the world, who really values family, which they do. They're going to love him regardless of who he is. I mean, it's their son. They don't see him as anything else. There is no major struggle with the relationship with Armie Hammer, or even his girlfriend for that matter. It's more internal conflict for Elio, but I don't feel that the film really dives into the internal conflict for Elio. I think it just keeps moving along, but at a pace, as you mentioned, that just didn't keep me gripped. But to be quite honest with you, you mentioned it, the monologue and the scene that plays out after that with Michael Stahlberg and Timothy Chalamet is probably the best supporting actor monologue of the year. The fact he's not nominated in this, and no offense to Christopher Plummer, because I love Christopher Plummer, but I think it's a farce. And he really felt like, in this movie, to me, this actor's performance felt like this silent giant throughout the whole film. and then he gets unleashed in the final 15 minutes. But I genuinely sat in this movie where I was bored, and kind of like you, I kind of wanted it to end. But then he opened his mouth in that scene, and I forgot everything that I saw prior to, and I only cared about what was going on there. So to me, the biggest problem with the film ends up being the fact that the supporting actor and the monologue he has sort of undermines everything that takes place before it and becomes the most interesting story. But then the film's going to end 10 minutes later. So there's structural issues with this that I was battling with. And I'm not saying the film lacks conflict altogether, but there's micro conflicts throughout, obviously, because it's got to have beats that it hits as a story. But I didn't feel like it dove enough into the internal conflict of Elio and his struggle. I feel like he was just embracing this change in him, this recognition of who he truly is. Because I don't want to say it's a change. It's not like he's making a choice. It's him becoming the person that he's going to be for the rest of his life. And then when it ended, I really only cared and wanted to know more about one particular character in the film, and it was neither of the leads.
So Michael Stuhlbarg, yeah, I think the problem is that he is probably, for both of us, probably the most interesting character in the movie. I would rather see a movie about him, really, than these other two characters. Again, you're right. Oliver and Elio don't have tons. I mean, it's okay. It's not. I mean, they have more chemistry than other romantic leads I've seen, but they almost have it in the film. But I hate to use the word again, but it's more just kind of boring. I mean, they just don't quite have. You can kind of tell that they care a lot about each other, but you can't tell that. I think when you have two people who truly love each other, there's a certain almost happiness and giddiness to them that I don't see these two characters having. It's more just a boring, we're in love type thing, and it just doesn't.
Yeah, I actually went to speak to a couple of people about this. Them sees a lot of things on my recommendation and also recommends things to me. I'm a quote unquote critic. I voice my opinion on film to various outlets. This person doesn't, but that person is a gay man who came out of that movie, and I was like, I want to hear what you think about Call Me by Your Name, because of the time period this person grew up and everything. Like, it was very different for him. So I wanted to know, what was it like, because he's older. He's about 60 years old. He didn't like this movie. Genuinely hated it. He didn't like it. He thought that there was no chemistry between the two leads. And I'm listening to him not rant, because he wasn't hate-filled about the movie. He didn't think it was trash. He was just like, in the end, it's just this really pretty movie with a decent enough relationship, but nothing that really clicked with me. Nothing in the movie clicked except for the monologue at the end of the movie. And the moment he got to saying that, I was like, all right, so the punchline, like the whole, like, I'm not crazy. Like, I thought the exact same thing, in that the movie, it does enough to keep me watching it. And I don't walk out of movies, okay? I don't. Either. Like, because I feel like sometimes they can pull a little, I'm not going to say they're going to M. Night Shyamalan me at the end and hook me and I'm going to love it. But like, this movie, it didn't do enough beat-wise or rhythm-wise to keep me wanting to see where this was going. And then it just surprised me with this greatness at the end of it. And then it ended. And I was like, okay, well, the fairest shake I can give this movie is it looks pretty. It's decently acted with a very exquisite performance by one of the, I think Stahlberg is one of the best actors of his generation. All right, so up next, we're going to dive right into Darkest Hour, which is directed by Joe Wright, starring Gary Oldman. This is a film that takes place during the early days of World War II, so think pre-American involvement entirely. And right now, basically, it's the fate of Western Europe. It's England as we know it. The great empire is really struggling to figure out what they're going to do. There have been engagements, and their allies are failing. Hitler is moving forward, and Parliament has no confidence in Neville Chamberlain. So newly elected Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who should be not an unknown name to really anyone who's been through any history class in school, is taking his office, and he is becoming this leader that we today know him to be. This is a very linear film, because if you know anything about the history of the Second World War, you know that Churchill made a few very important speeches that were broadcast to the British people. We know that at the same time, he was a very colorful character, if you ever read about Churchill the man. And so in the end, like, this film is very much akin to watching a very fine stage play that is like a biopic or a bioplay about a very colorful figure. For me, this film's biggest marks are, without question, and he's nominated for Best Actor, Gary Oldman's performance of Winston Churchill. A lot of great actors have played this part. A lot of them. In fact, you could probably just start riffing names off, and they probably played him at some point. Right now, I know that if you watch The Crown, John Lithgow is playing Winston Churchill on that series. If you go back a little bit, a couple of years, I think you'll find Brian Cox has played Winston Churchill. I believe Anthony Hopkins has played Churchill. Like,
Timothy Spall did it in King's Speech.
Timothy Spall did it. So, I mean, it's a star-making role for a lot of people. And in most cases, it's actually played by someone who's already a star. But in the case of Gary Oldman, what we get is a much more, I want to say, entertaining performance of Winston Churchill that is simultaneously introspective I think that it is full of nuance. I think it's nuance heavy. And for a man who has been nominated multiple times, never won. Most recently, the one that I thought he should have won for was Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, because it was almost like he had invented a new type of acting to cinematic audiences, which is doing as little as possible while doing so much in presence. This is sort of the opposite of that. This is a much more, I don't want to use the word garish in a negative light, but this has got a lot more flourish to its performance. And he is surrounded by great English actors in this movie. Ben Mendelsohn's in this, Kristen Scott Thomas, Lily James, Stephen Delane, if you're a Game of Thrones fan. Stannis Baratheon is in this movie. But you just kind of read down the list and you think, wow, this is a really strong cast. But the only one anyone's talking about is Gary Oldman. Period. But the other thing that I really enjoyed was the editing. And here's why. Joe Wright is a very visual director. This is the guy that did Atonement. He did Anna Karenina. These are films that really leap off the screen right in the audience's faces, with color, with pizzazz in the way scenes transition from one to another. And all of that really falls in matching your cinematography, which this is nominated for, but also the editing. And I don't want to leave this film out when I talk about one of the best edited films of the year, even though the Academy did not nominate it for that award. And then finally, I think it's a decent outing for Joe Wright. But again, this film, for me, in the end, it only lives and dies based on Gary Oldman's performance. Otherwise, it's just a decent visual treatment of Churchill in the early days of World War II, right when he took office. And he didn't know if he was going to be able to lead his country, which he loves so dearly, against these insurmountable odds with the Blitzkrieg going on and Paris falling and all of these other issues. And then Dunkirk actually takes place during this film. So you get that perspective of the Dunkirk incident at the same time. So yeah, like this film feels very, to me, theatrical in nature, and capturing it on camera and editing it together was done quite well. But aside from Oldman's performance and the makeup, obviously, because the prosthetics that he wore in this film are outstanding. Aside from those two big things, for me, it's a darn good movie, but it's not even remotely close to being a great one.
It is a very nice looking film to look at, and I agree with you that Gary Oldman is the best part of this movie. He is so much fun to watch in this. I could have watched him for another 2-4 more hours. I just had so much fun watching him. I don't think this is the best picture of the year, nor do I think it has any chance of winning the award. But I will say it was one of the films I had the most fun watching. I think what brings it down for me is that it's not doing anything, not that all best pictures have to be different or whatever, but it's not necessarily saying anything or doing anything or telling the story of this particular time in a way that I think is terribly different from other films and other stories that we've seen. So there isn't enough different about it, I think, to make it really stand out and really call it the best picture of the year. Again, they do it very well, and I definitely want to watch it again because I had a great time watching it, and I want to show it to people, and I will recommend it a lot to people. But yeah, it's a little bit too same for this type of film. I think it's a good film. It's a solid film, but yeah, not what I would call a great film. Great aspects of it, but not overall great.
Here's the thing. 5 minutes into this movie, Tim, I knew what was going to end the movie. I knew where it was going to end. And then the moment that he walks into the scene and he starts to, I was like, all right, yeah, no, I was right. But that doesn't make the movie bad, right? Like, it's about where did we go to get here? And as far as depiction of a government that is willing to rally behind Churchill and then not rally behind Churchill, and then he wins them over. You know what I'm saying? Like, you see how the politics of England ran in the face of invasion, and you feel like Winston Churchill is the only one who knows what he's up against. And there's a whole scene where that is described, and I believed him. They handle scenes, they handle the micro elements of what makes a great film really well. But then when you put the whole thing together, it's like, well, yeah, it's really good, but it's not as good as, because then you have to start thinking in bigger context.
It's a predictable movie, but they're doing the predictable stuff really well.
Exactly. So. I agree with you 100%. But in the end, what am I going to exalt this movie for? Oh, it's going to be Gary Oldman. 100% Gary Oldman. And Joe Wright and his team found the actor to play this part. They did a very admirable job of piecing together a visually engaging movie about a man who is known for his voice and known for his, to the public, okay? This is like, to you and me, we know what Winston Churchill said that rallied a nation behind him, and that's who he is. That's his defining characteristic. But the film does a decent enough job of showing us the man behind the microphone, and it also shows that he was human. And I think it has done a better job than a great deal of other portrayals of Churchill in showing us the human side of Winston Churchill, flaws and all. Because that's the thing. I mean, he's drinking and smoking the whole movie, and that was was Winston Churchill. He's arguing with people because of what he believes in, because he wasn't a dullard and he wasn't an idiot. And so he was there for a reason. And they kind of treat it like it was sort of a lack of options in the beginning.
But also, not just this flaws like he drinks too much and he's probably a bit too
Yeah.
rude and rough with people, but also just the fact that he has this very hard line of we cannot surrender to the Nazis, we can't enter into talks with the Nazis, we can't do any of that. That's not going to end well, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But there's still, at certain points in this film, still doubt with him, especially when things get really dire, where he thinks, is that the right option? I don't know anymore. He's not just pig-headed and he knows what he wants. To a degree he does, but at the same time there's still doubt at certain points where he doesn't know necessarily the right direction to go, because like you say, he does care about his country and he wants things to turn out well for its people, and they show the complicated aspect of being in that situation where you want to protect your country, you don't want to enter in agreements with people as horrible as the Nazis, but at the same time you don't want to be in a situation where they call the shots either. So it represents, I think, that conflict and the intricacies of politics, especially war politics, I think pretty well, especially since he's not just conflicting with the Nazis, so to speak, he's conflicting with his own government, and people don't like him much of the film. Most everybody is against him, and he has to inspire confidence in them. He has to keep them from kicking him out of office. So it's a very good three-dimensional performance that is written well and that shows all the intricacies and problems with that.
It's definitely a Best Actor winner in my book, and I think that anybody should sit down and watch it because it is a gripping film. It's interesting, and it moves along with a good pace, and it's very human. The take on it is very human, and I think that that's one of the biggest upsides that this film and a couple of other films in this category, I think, should be propped up for.
Okay, so we're going to move right along to Dunkirk. It takes place in 1940. The Nazis are determined to take over the world because they're a-holes. The Nazis have invaded France, and Allied forces have retreated to the French town or village, I don't know exactly how big it is, of Dunkirk. Prime Minister Winston Churchill doesn't want to give in to the Nazis, so he's desperate to get Allied forces, particularly UK forces, out of Dunkirk so that they can properly defend the UK. The evacuation in this film is shown through three different storylines, which all take place at the same time. The first story takes place over 1 week and follows a group of young British soldiers who are trying to escape the beaches of Dunkirk and make it back home. We primarily follow two of them, one played by, it's an up-and-coming young actor, Fionn Whitehead.
Fionn Whitehead?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other is best known for being a member of One Direction, Harry Styles. The second storyline takes place over 1 day and follows a father, played by Mark Rylance, who takes his son and another young British boy to be a part of the civilian navy that is made up of small personal boats that have been asked to help rescue the Allied troops. They are joined at one point by Cillian Murphy, who is a shell-shocked, otherwise known as PTSD now, British soldier who wants to go back home and doesn't want to go back to Dunkirk because of what's happened to him. And then finally there's a third story which takes place over the course of 1 hour, which is about a fighter pilot played by Tom Harding, who is part of a team of pilots who are trying to shoot down enemy aircrafts that are firing and bombing Dunkirk and trying to take out Allied forces. So one of my favorite aspects of the movie is that it doesn't have much dialogue in it, which I think what that does, mixed with the music and the cinematography and the pacing of the movie, which is very, you hit the ground running and you don't really stop until the end of the movie. And I feel in this film, not having much dialogue in the movie, you're really much more gripped onto what's going on. You don't want to look away very much because you're just kind of mesmerized into what's happening in this. So I think that was a very good choice. You're just held onto it from the beginning and then until it ends. It just unfolds in a way that is so interesting and it's so different from any of the other films of this year. And I think even different from the other Nolan films that jump around in time, which again is most of them.
Of all the films nominated for Best Picture this year, I think this is my favorite one that I've talked about throughout the last calendar year of seeing movies, period. This film is 106 minutes of tightly edited, very large scale and very precise filmmaking with excellent performances from everybody involved in the cast. A lot of practical filmmaking went into making this come to life on a big screen. And by practical, I mean they actually flew planes. They actually had boats. Do you know what I'm saying? saying? Like they
Yeah,
didn't fill the screen with CGI. They did it when they had to.
and Christopher Nolan
Um,
is known for that. He doesn't.
yes,
He's very
yes,
practical as much as humanly possible. And you mentioned the editing being very precise in all of his films. I saw somebody describe it as basically like if somebody's having a dialogue scene, as soon as they're done with that dialogue scene, cut.
yeah. We move on.
Every second of the movie needs to be in there for a reason, and this he does even more in this film.
To me, this was the true epic of the year as far as films go. And I'm not going to count superhero movies that are just grand in scale. I mean, this is an epic film with a lot of shades of David Lean. And if you're not familiar with David Lean, think Bridge on the River Kwai, think Lawrence of Arabia. These are large scale films. Like they are typically long, typically very drawn out. But the thing about Dunkirk for me is that it takes the scale of those films and it wraps it up nice and tight. And everything feels very precise and done with great deliberation. There's intent behind every cut. There's intent behind every move of the characters within the film. This film, from start to finish, was pulling at the collar of your shirt to join it. Like that's what it was doing. And through its incredibly tight editing, I'm just going to keep harping on that because I want this to win the Oscar for best editing. I think that Hoyte van Hoytema's cinematography, as much as I love Roger Deakins, this film, if it wins best cinematography, I would argue that it is deserved. Where they mounted the cameras and what they did to show us the tension in every one of these scenes, be it from the cockpit of a plane or inside the hull of a beached fishing trawler or just watching the scale of like a boat sinking. And then you get these really tight close-ups with these expositional like flourishes where you can see what these characters are feeling and how they're relating to what's going on around them, which in many cases is utter chaos. Able to get a very precisely executed display of chaos and frenetic, what's the word I'm looking for? Just frenetic beats, one right, and energy, one right after another. And Hans Zimmer's score, I got to be honest with you, this is one of my favorite scores he's ever done. It's very ambitious, it's very layered, and I've listened to it more than I have any other score from last year, including Star Wars The Last Jedi. But at the same time, I fell in love with so much when I watched this movie because this is the type of movie that I think the last time I saw a movie similar to this and felt the same way was Saving Private Ryan.
Even though Nolan said he wanted to make this different than Saving Private Ryan.
Yes, it's more similar feelings. I didn't see Saving Private Ryan in this movie at all. I saw a very large scale. He's telling three different sets of how time passed, three stories that have each, like you said, one takes place over a week, one takes place over a day, and one takes place over an hour, and somehow manages to concurrently edit all three of those together, and they all feel like they happened as quickly and yet agonizingly slow as any other. Like each one of them, they all felt so gripping. And I've argued about this with other people. I think this was the masterpiece film that came out last year. Do I think it's going to win Best Picture? No. But was this probably my favorite in terms of technical precision and execution in telling a story? And in this case, it was one giant story, but told from three different perspectives. And it did so in what could have been a 4-hour film. Nolan could have done this movie over the course of 4 hours, and he didn't. This could have been a true World War II epic that just spanned hours and felt draining. But instead, it was this nonstop from start to finish, gives you brief moments, to catch your breath. And again, this is like if you go to action film school, he does all of those things and he does them right. And then at the same time, he's telling a much bigger story than an action film. You care about these characters, and it doesn't fail to what I called Call Me By Your Name out for with not being as introspective. Somehow in this epic film, we're introspective with every one of the concurrent storylines. Like I feel like I know who Farrier is by the end of the film. I feel like I know who Cillian Murphy's character is and who Mark Rylance's character is. I know who Kenneth Branagh's character is. His cast was outstanding. So like it feels like this is the film that when it all boils down to what makes it great, there's not a thing on the list of like, music, photography, acting, directing, editing, casting, like all of it, everything's a checkmark plus. Yeah. Everything. And I don't want to let people forget that.
I think one of the benefits of going back to the editing again, one, if you had done a 2-hour movie, especially a 2.5-hour or longer movie, with the kind of energy this one has, it would have been totally exhausting. But also, because it's so tightly edited and so just moves, it really puts you in the headspace of the people who are in this movie where, like you said, it's just chaos and things are just happening really quickly, whether it's a day or an hour or a week. It's just happening very, very quickly. You don't really know what's going on. Stuff happens and then this happens and this happens, and you're just constantly being thrown off your balance. So I think the editing helps get that across. The editing helps the emotion and the story. It's not just him being concise, it really benefits the story.
We were littered with directors this year who had vision and executed those vision. And that's why I go back to my statement earlier at the beginning of the podcast where I said I think this is one of the best like batches of 9 films to be nominated for Best Picture that we've had in years. Maybe even since 2009 when they started doing this whole we're getting away from 5 and we're going to go bigger. When you get into things like Three Billboards, Get Out, Dunkirk, like Lady Bird, like all of these are directors' films.
Yeah.
Really, they are. I always make sure to mention the director of a film when I go to talk about it, be it on the radio or just at the water cooler. I want to make sure people know who made stuff because usually the average moviegoer is going to find a director that matches their sensibilities, their tastes, their wants. Okay. But I hate to tell everybody, Christopher Nolan is beholden to no one other than Christopher Nolan. And that's evident in every film he's ever made, including the Batman films. Nolan is an artist. He makes something and then you get to react to it. And it's fine because that means he might make something that isn't very good. But in his mind, he is a visionary director. And Dunkirk to me is amongst all of the other films, because of that, it is the true director's film. I felt like this was watching an auteur's work. And this auteur was collaborating with everybody at the highest level to make this movie happen. All right. Wow. Fresh off that really spirited discussion about Dunkirk, we're going to move right into Get Out, directed by Jordan Peele of comedy duo Key and Peele, which many people I know are familiar with. They were a brilliant duo that had a show on Comedy Central for many years, but the show is over. They're still great friends. They still do work together, but they have their own independent projects that they work on now. And Jordan Peele this year really had a breakout film, and it came out much earlier in 2017 than I believe any of the other films nominated for Best Picture. It was practically a year ago. In fact, it came out February 24th. So that's a very early release for a film to have a fair amount of steam going into Golden Globes, Oscars, SAG-AFTRA, DGAs, like, awards season. For a first outing written and directed by, this was definitely the breakout film of the year as far as knowing where the guy came from and everything. But the premise of the film is actually about a mixed race couple. Daniel Kaluuya and Allison Williams play a couple that it's time to go meet Allison Williams' parents. And so it's not that the family knows that her boyfriend is African American, but she doesn't think there's going to be any problems with it. And he's only got a little bit of nervousness about it because he's a confident young man. He's not afraid to be in love with someone who is, in this case, it's Allison Williams. But at the same time, he's got a little bit of nervousness behind him. And then what happens when he gets there? Yeah, it goes down straight up horror film lane. There's no other way to explain it than that. I mean, this is a black comedy, and I don't mean that in that it's directed by a black man and stars a black man. I mean, this is like a dark comedy horror film that has a lot of layers to it, and it's got some great acting from Catherine Keener, Bradley Whitford, Daniel Kaluuya himself, and Allison Williams. They're all bringing a lot of fun to these portrayals. There are elements to this movie that speak far beyond being a comedy and a horror film. This is a film that is satirizing a lot of things. This is a film that's calling out racism. This is a film that is very much putting discussions of racism and how to combat it in society at the forefront. It's lampooning certain elements of racism, and at the same time, I think that it has some very hopeful ambitions as well. This is a film that is saying more than just being a film. And that's, I think, why the Academy has rightfully given it its due and why it's in this category. This has been the film that has probably stuck with me the heaviest throughout the year. Anytime something new came out or people were like, oh, Oscar bait, I was like, yeah, but Get Out is like seriously the movie everybody should be talking about. So to be nominated and to not have been forgotten despite an early release, I think speaks very highly of the film. I think that Jordan Peele has made quite an entrance as a director. This is the film that I think everyone should spend a lot of time talking about because I think there's a lot thematically. I think there's a lot of substance within the script. I think that as funny as this script is, it's also drastically, in big ways, horrifying. And visually, it's a movie that I think executes very well on many different levels.
They do some minor jump scare things in it, but it's mostly about mood and tension, and it's the whole thing. You're really in the shoes of this guy who is very uncomfortable during this whole movie because Jordan Peele makes this situation so weird and unnerving that you're just not comfortable doing this entire movie. You just want...
Which, by the way, you shouldn't be. And I think that that speaks to the execution. A big thing for me with this film and what makes it stand out is the fact that Jordan Peele is this brilliant comedian, but he knows how to take something like a horror film or a psychological thriller and turn it into an ensemble film that stays engaging from beginning to end, has laughs in all the right places where it needs them, forwards its suspense and its unnerving elements at all the right times. You can tell that this was written by a skilled comedian. It had all the right timing. Every narrative beat, every line delivered, every placement of the camera, there's just timing and editing even. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I'm a white person. I was uncomfortable at times. That was by design and it was executed perfectly. I think that I came out feeling like I learned something when I watched this movie. I feel like this is a movie that helps take what is otherwise a very contentious topic of racism in America, and I think that it helps break ice. And Jordan Peele literally wrote himself a blank check for any idea he wants in the future. He really did. I mean, there's no director in this list that I'm looking more forward to seeing the next piece of work from than Jordan Peele. And that counts Greta Gerwig, who I know was the other breakout director this year.
One thing I will say against the film, well, I guess two things. One, I think the pacing was, for me, a bit off. It felt like there was a lot of introduction stuff, and then it kind of moves along a lot quicker more near the end of the film. And then also, this is more near the beginning of the film, and it kind of wasn't a problem later, but the beginning of the film, before all the weird stuff, or the really weird stuff, starts happening, and the thriller aspect gets kicked into high gear, when you're just being introduced to these characters, I think they were trying a little bit too hard for the dialogue to seem kind of off the cuff and not scripted and stuff. It was a disappointment in scripting, where there's a certain way you can do that, where it just seems very natural, you're just seeing people talking, and they were trying to go for that, but it just felt a little bit, again, like Jordan Peele was trying a bit too hard to do that, so it was just not hitting the right mark, so I got kind of impatient with that, I guess.
I would not disagree with a bit of looseness in the script that could have been tightened up. I think that that's a fair statement. I mean, it is nominated for writing, but that doesn't mean that it's perfect. Okay, I'm throwing it out there. Like, if you want to find reasons to not award it Best Original Screenplay, I think that I would agree with what you just said. I guess the last thing I want to say about the movie is that this movie had every opportunity to make the ending or some key element within the story very trite. You know what I mean? Like, he woke up from a dream, or it could have gone a bunch of different routes. But in the end, the ending of the movie chooses one that, for the first time, movies of its ilk attacking these issues, it didn't go brutally realistic to the point where you were sad and upset and pissed off when it was over. It actually went a very hopeful route, and it didn't do it in a cheesy way. I was in a fairly populated theater. It was like the second night it was out. It was a Saturday night or Friday night, because it came out on a Thursday, and there were at least 200 people in the theater I was in, and probably a 300 seat theater. Let's say that. And I'm not going to spoil it, but when a certain character shows up toward the end of the film, there was applause and cheers. And that shows you that the audience was connected with the film. This is a film that, whether it wins or loses, is probably still going to be the movie people talk about the most in this entire category.
Okay, so next up we're going to be talking about Lady Bird, a film I am very fond of. It stars Saoirse Ronan as a teenage girl whose name is Christine, but she goes by a name that she came up with, which is Lady Bird. She lives in Sacramento in 2002, and she's soon to be graduating from high school. She's a senior, and she's getting ready to go to college. Her dream is to go to a liberal arts school in New York, but her family, they have money, but it's not a lot, so money is very tight. So Lady Bird's mother, played by Laurie Metcalf, conflicts with Lady Bird a lot throughout the film about various different things, but especially about where Lady Bird is going to go to college, and she thinks Lady Bird should go to a local college, and Lady Bird is not for that idea at all. She hates that. She wants to leave Sacramento. She doesn't want to live there anymore, and so she keeps her eyes focused on wanting to go to college in New York. At the same time, she tries out for a play at her Catholic high school. She gets a boyfriend, she becomes distant with her best friend, and things go from there. So this was one of the first films I saw for the Oscar season, and it's one of my favorites because, for one, I like Saoirse Ronan as an actress. She's one of my favorite actresses right now. I think, well, we'll get more into this later, but I think Laurie Metcalf is brilliant in the movie. But also, the overall thing that I like about it that makes me like it so much is it has, to me, a total lack of bullshit in it. It's just a very real movie about a thing we don't see enough about, which I mean, the main part of the movie is kind of about Saoirse Ronan and her relationship with Lloyd Metcalf character. So it's about a mother and a daughter. But the other elements of the movie too, beyond this the mother-daughter angle, I don't think we see very much, or we don't see in this way. Which is why I want to see more movies by Greta Gerwig. Yeah, it's a unique film with a director who has a very specific point of view, a particular style. Even though this is only her first film, and I'm sure she'll probably develop that if she hopefully does make more movies. But it just was refreshing to watch. That's another word I would use. It was just refreshing to watch the movie. And to go back to Lloyd Metcalf's character, every time she was on screen, I enjoyed her. She was one of the best parts of this movie. Not to say that she's the only good part of this movie, but she's one of the best parts of this movie. And she is just a real mother. She reminded me of other people in my life, especially with her relationship with her daughter. And I know Larry Metcalf is getting a lot of more buzz lately, but I had known her from what a lot of people know her from, which is Roseanne, and she was fine in that. I don't have a problem with her in that show, but if you really want to see how good she can be, go watch this movie.
I also really enjoyed Lady Bird. If you were going to talk about a director and an actor pairing that I think clicked the best out of every film this year, this is what got to be one of the top two or three. Period. There's only a couple others that I think might outweigh this one, but for some reason, Greta Gerwig and Saoirse Ronan, like their pairing in this, really made this movie what it is. And then more so, like you were pointing out, Laurie Metcalf has been a working actress more than anybody cares to like really kind of remember or acknowledge. I mean, because I've seen her on Broadway and she's stellar. The woman is just an actor's actor through and through. But she clearly had great renown thanks to Roseanne. I mean, she was an Emmy winner for that show. She's a Tony winner. She's no stranger to being recognized for her acting efforts. I think this time, though, in this case, being nominated for Best Supporting Actress is very much a given. You know, when you just watch this movie, like it is easily one of the best supporting actress roles, but also performances, period. Gerwig, I think, in a world where we're starting to realize that women directors have just as much of a voice as men directors, we just need to let them have their time to direct. It makes a breakout debut as a writer-director. And I think for her, this has just been a burning passion and something that she's always wanted to do. And not every director gets to tell their story so effectively the first time out. But something about this movie, from the moment it started to the moment it ended, I loved all of these characters, even the ones I'm not supposed to. I thought that this was a really fresh take on the coming of age story, especially of a young woman. I think that she did everything right in casting. If you were going to look at a by design small film, you know, like small budget, and it's got a very independent spirit behind it, but all the stars aligned, Lady Bird is that film. If we are finally at the dawn of the Academy and Hollywood recognizing great efforts by women directors and writers, amazing. This should have happened decades ago, but it didn't. And so I want to point out that Greta Gerwig has been this talent who has worked with all the right people to be a great storyteller, who has probably always been a great storyteller, but she has paid her dues and done the work, and she has put in the time and somehow made a film that people have been talking about nonstop, and directed great actresses. Like the talent and the know-how and being a fixture in the industry that Gerwig has been as an actress elevated her to finally be able to simply tell a story the way she wanted to. And if you compare this to like the likes of Dunkirk or even maybe Three Billboards, like no, it's not trying to be those films. It's just trying to be itself. It's all character growth and it's coming of age. That's what it is. But at the same time, surrounded by great talent, you care about the motivations and you care about what these people are doing, and you want to root for certain ones, and you just want to tell others to shut the hell up sometimes. But that's what makes this movie so great, is that this was, I think, the passion of passion projects. And I think that everything clicked for it. Do I think it's going to win Best Picture? No. But is it one of the best I saw last year? Without a doubt.
You mentioned that because of Get Out, you're going to basically be keeping an eye on Jordan Peele as a director. I feel that same way about Greta Gerwig, and I think for me, I mean, for one, I think she has a lot to live up to, because again, I did love this film so much, so I've been
Yeah.
very interested to see what she follows this with. She has a lot to live up to that, but I'm really eager to see what she's gonna do next. And again, this is why this is so important to push for more women voices or more African American voices or more transgender voices, whatever, is so you can see these different things. Like we talked about last year when we did this, I wasn't a huge fan of Moonlight. I didn't love it. But one of the things
Right.
I liked about it the most was that it was taking me to a place in society and put me, as best as a movie can, put me in the point of view of a race that I am not and a sexuality that I am not. It puts me in there, and I like that. I like seeing things I don't normally see. I like being put in
Right.
environments I don't normally see. So that's why this is so important, because this film is putting you in a thing that a lot of people are not familiar with or haven't been in. So this is like a poster child for why everybody finds this such a big deal. So, I mean, if you're somebody listening to this and you don't get why this is such a hot issue, this is why. Because you can get great films like this, and these voices are not being listened to. And that's a tragedy, because then Greta Gerwig could have very easily been ignored. This film wouldn't have been made or wouldn't have gotten a wide distribution, and not
Right.
many people would have known about it. And would have missed out on this great film. So this is why studios have to not only make these films, but they have to promote them and give them attention and love and stuff.
And I think that something that we have to keep in mind, again, intrinsic in all of the machinations of Hollywood, is it's who you know and how do you know what I mean? But she, I think, has been a talent who has grown on her own and done her own thing for so long as an actress that she has earned every step of her career. And I think that she's always backed herself up with the right type of people to be able to become the storyteller that we have now been introduced to her to be. The other thing is that this is a film that is saying something within the confines of its story, which is Lady Bird is a young woman. She's supposed to be a synecdoche of young women coming of age. She gets told no so much in this movie. And most of that's from her mother, but also even from her teachers and friends and everything else. Like, people don't want to take her seriously. She defies all of them, and she does what she wants, and she does it on her own terms. To me, that is a very good indicator of what could be considered Best Picture this year, because we're talking about a time where Hollywood is waking the hell up, and it's giving, women the megaphone that they have so rightly deserved for so long, and it acts as a beacon of this revolution that's going on. And I think that Lady Bird being recognized as much as it is well worth it, and I am excited to see where that goes. Like you said with Gerwig, I want to see what's next for her. And I think that knowing the pool that she runs around with, the option to tell another great story, it's going to come. It's just a question of when and what for her. It's not going to be a why or a how. It's going to be when and what. So, moving on to number 6 in the Best Picture category, we're going to talk about Phantom Thread. Paul Thomas Anderson is your writer-director on this. This is nominated for 6 total Oscars. The big thing, it's Daniel Day-Lewis, his alleged final performance. He is apparently retiring after this one. And it takes place in the 1950s in London and focuses on the life of a fictional high-fashion designer, Reynolds Woodcock, who is a renowned dressmaker who lives a very routine, focused all around him lifestyle, but he's the best at what he does. And he dresses royalty, he dresses the rich, and everything he does is unique and stellar. And just, if you don't know this, high fashion is a form of art. This would probably be one of the types of people who would define that as an art medium. He's that good. And it's about how he lives his life. And when you come into his home, which is also where he does all of his work, he has a relationship where he runs this business with his sister Cyril. And as you can tell, he essentially has a history of falling in love with a young woman. She will go so far as to even live in the household, probably work for him, be a sort of muse for the work that he does. But eventually, Reynolds gets bored. And when he gets bored with that person, his sister does a nice job of shepherding them on their way. And the film, when it picks up, a relationship is ending with a young woman. He does not like having his day disrupted. It seems like breakfast is the most important meal of the day for Reynolds, because if it doesn't go well, his whole day is thrown off. He has temper tantrums, he has rage fits, and you can derail the man by eating your toast loudly. That's essentially how delicate his sensibilities are. But he falls in love with a young woman named Alma, and Alma is played by Vicky Krieps. Alma serves as a muse for him and proves to be a bit more than that. And that's kind of where this film starts to blossom and change and evolve. This is Paul Thomas Anderson, man. I don't know any other way to say it. It's that every film this guy's made has felt like an exercise in auteurship. This is no different. The themes of this movie, compared to the others in this category, as far as the story goes, this has been probably the one that when I've talked about it with other people, it's come off as probably the one story they didn't love. They didn't really care about it so much. They didn't think it was as good as some of the others in this category. I can see that maybe being a fair criticism. I think that people come in for Paul Thomas Anderson and they stay for Daniel Day-Lewis. I really think that Vicky Krieps was snubbed. honestly, for Best Supporting Actress or Best Lead Actress this year. She was outstanding. To sit and go toe-to-toe with Daniel Day-Lewis to pretty much boiling point in a couple of scenes says a lot about her talents. And at the same time, this is a movie that is, much like I think I said with Dunkirk about a director and their vision, this is very much a director's vision film. This is 100% PTA just in overdrive. It's different. And a lot of people went in to see this movie expecting something, and they got something entirely different.
So I have a bit of confession to make on this film. I really hated the experience of watching this.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's very fair.
And maybe that's partially because I was doing something I said I wouldn't try to do. And I knew very little about this film going in. I guess I was going into it thinking I would see more of a traditional Oscar period piece type thing. And I didn't get that, which is fine in a way. But, well, I guess my main problem I have with this, and I don't want to give too much away about what happens in the movie, but the main focus of this movie is the relationship between Daniel Day-Lewis and the other character whose name I'm forgetting. It's their romance, their butting heads, and they're getting along and all that stuff. But it's a very, very unhealthy relationship that they have together. And this is me, a personal thing. I really don't like seeing movies where they have really unhealthy relationships with each other. I just don't enjoy that. I was actually depressed for a while after seeing this movie. But again, that's more of a personal thing. And if you are okay with seeing a movie like that, then this is a great movie to see for that reason. Also, I don't know, it was a movie that threw me off a lot because it was very different from what I was expecting. It had a much different tone than I thought it would. It gets very dark in places, and I wasn't expecting it to get that dark. So it really just threw me for a loop, that movie. But there's some stuff I liked about it. I like Daniel Day-Lewis's character. I wouldn't want to be around his character because I think he's a jerk and I don't like him. But I like Daniel Day-Lewis's performance as that character. I think he's done other performances that are better. I don't necessarily think it's Best Actor of the Year. So I liked him in the performance. I like some of the stuff they did with the cinematography. I like that stuff, but overall, it's just, I was really bored by Call Me By Your Name, but I didn't find that necessarily an unpleasant experience. I just didn't care. This movie, I guess I cared more, but I was just miserable. Again, it's probably more of a my taste thing. It's like how I think I mentioned last year. I didn't particularly like Fences. I found that really unpleasant. Not to this degree as I did for this film, but I don't say it's a bad film, but it's not a film that I have any interest in watching again, and I don't really want to watch it again. So on a subjective level, I would say no to the film. On a more objective level, yeah, it's pretty good.
This is one of the films where you watch the movie and I don't think anyone actually likes any of the characters in the movie. I mean, Cyril, she's not very likable. She's not approachable. She's not open. She's not really anything. Leslie Manville's performance is outstanding, but like she's not out to be liked. And then you have Daniel Day-Lewis's character who's just like, he screams being an only child, but he's not. And I'm an only child, so I can say that. But the point is that he's fussy and he's needy and the whole world needs to revolve around him. And he doesn't want to do anything for anybody that it's not his idea. And here's the thing too, Vicky Krieps' character, Alma, comes off as this like innocent waitress in this countryside restaurant who he falls in love with, obviously, and flirts with, and et cetera, et cetera. But you sit there and you watch it and it's like, oh, why is she wrapped up in all this? But then you get to know her and you're like, I don't like her either. So like, it's this perpetual like dislike. By the end of the movie, who did I like? Who did I like? I don't know who I liked at all. I don't know, the Belgian royalty that came and visited and said hi. Like, they were nice enough. But by the end of the movie, you don't have any one person in particular that you want to cheer for, or it's just so strange that a movie that I didn't like anybody in, I really like the movie.
If you want to see a movie where you're fine with seeing that, you don't necessarily condone it, but you're fine with seeing that, you're interested in seeing that, and a movie that really keeps you guessing, you don't really know where it's going. I think, at least for me, I didn't know where it was going at any point. As soon one point you think you know where it's going, it just takes a turn and it goes off in a totally different direction to the point where I didn't know how it was going to end. So if you like seeing a movie like that, go see this. If you're somebody like me who doesn't like seeing toxic relationships on screen, maybe stay away from it.
I think the thing with Phantom Thread is that of all the films nominated in this category, I think Phantom Thread is the hardest sell to tell people to go see. And I'm not trying to say because it's high art. It's not what I'm trying to get across. What I'm trying to get across is it's full of people you're not going to like, but it's a brilliant execution of directing and writing and filming. And I do think that as far as being a PTA film, I'm not saying because the guy made a movie it should be nominated for Best Picture, but I think this one is a very deserving nominee in this category. It is one of my favorite films of the year. I wouldn't say that it's top 5, but it is one of my favorite. And I think that knowing that, and now that I've said it and it's done and it's out there, I don't expect anybody to watch it. I can't really implore people to watch it. If somebody said, Blake, I want a movie full of people that I don't like, and I want it to be beautifully made, and I want it to, I guess in a way, piss me off while I watch it or upset me, I'll be like, oh, you got to watch Phantom Thread. It's brilliant. That's exactly what you're asking for. And Tim, as a person who's known as a cinephile, like, when has anybody ever asked you for a film like that? They don't. People don't ask for that.
There was a theater teacher who I knew who told me once, people don't want to go to the theater and probably also movies or television to be depressed. And this is a movie that I don't know if it's going to depress you the same way it depressed me, but it's not really a movie you want to go to. Naturally. It's not what you naturally would want.
And I think that's a very fair statement. I think that this film does not fall within the realm of everyone's taste.
Okay, so next up is The Post, directed by Steven Spielberg. This tells the real-life story of the Washington Post acquiring the Pentagon Papers in the early 1970s. Richard Nixon was president during that time. The government papers reveal these not so good secrets about the U.S. government's efforts in Vietnam that date all the way back to Truman. And they're secrets that the Post and other newspapers who get these papers and hear about these papers want the American people to know about. But one of the papers that does publish, I think at least 1 or 2 articles about these papers, they basically get, I think it's a cease and desist order, so they can't publish anymore. And the Post, which is run by executive editor Ben Bradlee, who was played by Tom Hanks, and the publisher Katharine Graham, played by Meryl Streep, have to decide how best to handle the publishing of these papers or whether to even publish them at all because of certain things going on with the company at the time. If this goes wrong, it could mean the end of the paper. And Katharine Graham, this is a family business. She doesn't want to see that happen. So there's a lot of tension. And so this is a very topical film, probably one of the most, maybe not the most topical film of the year out of these nominees. And when I saw the trailers for this film, I thought the same thing. I thought it looked really intense. I thought it would be really good. I saw the movie, and honestly, I was quite disappointed in it. It was very underwhelming. It wasn't as tense as I was hoping it would be. It was just... out of all the movies that we're talking about and we'll talk about for this year's Oscars, I think it's the most forgettable. I actually keep forgetting that I've seen it, and I keep forgetting it's one of the movies we're supposed to be talking about. And that's not a knock to... I mean, I love Steven Spielberg. Like a lot of people, he's one of my favorite directors. I love seeing a film by him. But I don't know. I just think he didn't quite nail it with this one. And again, it goes down to, I think, tension. There wasn't enough tension in this movie to really show you, and really enough emotional build-up to really be put in the shoes of the people at the Washington Post who have to make this big decision that will affect not just America but their paper. So you really want to make things really tense and like, oh my god, what we're gonna do. And they don't make it as big of a deal as I think they really need to really get across how monumental this was.
It shares a lot of similarities with another film of its ilk, and I say of its ilk meaning depicting a pillar of journalism and how things were handled in the history and fabric of America, and the other is All the President's Men. If that comes to mind when you walk into the Post, and that's the bar that you're going to try to measure it by, yeah, it doesn't have nearly the tension or intrigue. It's more of a depiction and this is a paint by numbers, and I hate to limit it to that, but it's kind of like a paint by numbers, this is how it all went down. And that's really what it is. By the end of the movie, it's like, oh, so that's how it all went down. And clearly that's not how it all went down. But you said this is probably the most topical film. I think this is the most overtly topical film for obvious reasons. We live in an era of just saying fake news automatically discredits something with half of readership. That's the era we live in now, which is garbage, but that's beside the point. This is a film, I think it's a compelling story. I think it's great that the story has been told. It's one of those things where, to me, I thought the film was doing a really solid job of telling the story. I thought that the performances were all outstanding. But as far as comparing it to something along the lines, and again, because in the end, that's really what this podcast is about, comparing these movies to see what one is going to be the best picture of the year. For an ensemble film of large scale, which this is in many cases, none of this comes close to something like Dunkirk, which is a big film, which is much more ambitious in its storytelling. It doesn't get lost in performances, doesn't focus its camera on things that sometimes just feel a little bit erroneous. I really enjoyed a lot of things about this movie. One, I think it's a solid effort from Spielberg. I think it's more of a passion project than more of an artistic project. I think this is a story he wanted to tell because of the time we live in. It's engaging enough, but it's not ambitious, and it's not doing anything up until like the final moments, where I went ahead and looked this up because this was the thing that stood out to me the most about watching this movie, other than enjoying specifically Bob Odenkirk. I thought Bob Odenkirk's performance in this movie is the one thing no one's talking about, but everybody should be. I think that it was the standout performance in a movie with Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep, for God's sakes. Like, to me, that was what I want people to focus on when they watch the movie, because I felt it was the most genuine. It was something where it wasn't just Bob Odenkirk saying the words that were written on paper. I think it was Bob Odenkirk channeling something special and really giving it his all. And, you know, everybody knows him now from Better Call Saul, but back in his Mr. Show days, nobody would have given the comedian the time of day. This guy's an actor. It's in there. It's present, and it has been for quite a while. Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul just really put it out in the forefront. Because here's the funny thing, like, David Cross and Bob Odenkirk play coworkers in this movie, and they were Mr. Show. I mean, they've been a comedy duo since the 90s, right? They're really close friends and collaborators. If the film was less of an ensemble film and it only focused on like key editors, you would not have cast Bob Odenkirk in the role that he played. Michael Stahlberg would have played the role that he played, who is in this movie, by the way, and it would have been a very different film, a tighter film, a more contained film. This felt very open, and it tries to be bigger, I think, than it actually is. And I think there was a severe lack of urgency in this film, and I don't think that there was enough tension and importance built into the idea that these people, for a hot second, were breaking the law, and then they fought to make sure that they weren't, and they won. The other thing is the line that gets quoted, and I'm going back a second, the line that gets quoted is from the opinion from the Supreme Court, which is, you know, the press was to serve the governed, not the governors. The moment that that's said in the movie, I felt like up till then we were just doing a depiction piece, and we were just showcasing like a historical drama about how this happened. Then I felt it just put its preacher's pants on, and it took this left turn toward trying to say something more. I didn't feel that that was the energy of the film up until that moment. And that's mainly my knock on the film. I'm not saying that I'm going to knock being preachy about that, or I'm going to knock that being the soapbox the movie wanted to stand on. I was just curious why there wasn't a soapbox sooner in the movie, because otherwise it just felt like they were telling this story. This is just how it happened. But in the end, they really throttle you with it. They hit you hard.
That's a good point. It's something I hadn't thought about, that they really probably, I might have liked the film more if they had weaved that kind of theme or message throughout the movie. And maybe they're trying to do that, but if they are, they're not succeeding.
It's maybe they're too subtle throughout the whole movie up till that point. They wanted to hit it hard until the end. Well, by the end, I was just ready for it to end because I got it. You know what I mean? Like, here's the problem. It's a historical drama. Like, one quick Wikipedia read up and you already know everything that's going to happen in the movie. And then it's about nuance. It's about what happens in between. A movie like Dunkirk or Darkest Hour has the same problem. They have to depict history and seem fresh and interesting. Dunkirk did a far superior job of depicting history and being engaging and ambitious and different than this movie did. So in the end, this just feels procedural as opposed to fresh and new and neat.
Exactly. And my wife likes to use the example of, she'll use another Tom Hanks movie, Apollo 13, as an example of a movie where, you know, if you know anything about NASA or space exploration history, you know how the story ends. But if you construct the movie right and build tension and you care about the characters or what the story, whatever, enough, you're going to be gripped by what's happening. That's why we can rewatch movies and still be gripped on what's going on. Even if we know what's going to happen, it's because we just get so involved with it. So I don't think that movie really succeeds in that. I mean, I kind of cared about what was going to happen, but it didn't really build up that tension of, I know what's going to happen, but I'm still really tense about what's going to happen. It just doesn't succeed in that. That's what it had to do, and that's what Dunkirk does that, Darkest Hour does that, but this film just doesn't hit that height.
I mean, in the end, like, I've seen it. I don't think I ever need to see this again. All right, and our eighth nominee in the Best Picture category is Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water. This film follows a lonely janitor played by Sally Hawkins, who is mute, who works at a top-secret research facility in the 1960s. But she ends up being tasked with keeping a very specific lab clean, and inside that lab is kept a creature that has been pulled from the Amazon. And if you're thinking, oh, creature from the Black Lagoon, quite similar. There's a little bit more. to the creature than just being a quote-unquote monster. But this is very much a Guillermo del Toro film in every way. This is a charming film. This is a suspenseful film. This is a film that, if anything, it has the best art direction of any film I saw in 2017. This was a world that I wanted to go to and see and be a part of. He really makes the type of films that transport the audience. And continuing my synopsis a little bit, she doesn't just clean the lab, she develops a connection with the creature. Sally Hawkins is backed with a pretty much what I would call an all-star cast in every sense of the word. Michael Shannon plays our chief antagonist. Richard Jenkins plays her neighbor by the name of Giles in one of my favorite performances of the year. Octavia Spencer, who is, I think, one of everybody's favorite actresses. Even if you don't remember her name, but you know her and you see her and you love her, she plays her good friend at work. And then we've mentioned his name a lot on this podcast. Michael Stahlberg plays a character by the name of Dr. Robert Hofstetler. And then, you know what? I know you and I are probably going to talk a lot about this guy, but he plays the creature. He has been probably, of all the actors in this movie, he's the number one collaborator with Guillermo del Toro. He's worked with him on, I think, six
No,
films, maybe?
it's been one second. Let me count.
I know you know, because you just have to think about it. But while you're counting, I'll just quickly say Doug Jones is his name. He is an actor who, to call him a character actor is a gross understatement. This is a guy who goes into full body makeup, full body characters. He assigns new body language, new ways of speaking, just anything you can think of. Doug Jones is just as creative of a mind as Guillermo del Toro is. I'm giving him plug right now because I feel like he is going to be one of the greatest actors to never be recognized by the Academy because of the type of roles that he plays. He plays these roles that are so involved in animatronics and makeup and prosthetics, and he gets hidden behind so much that you don't always get to see what a great actor he actually is.
First off, I'll say that I just did a podcast on all of Guillermo del Toro's films, since Shape of Water is his 10th film, so I will be repeating certain points probably here and there.
Mhm.
But on the Doug Jones part, yeah, he's a very talented actor who rarely, if ever, gets the credit he deserves. I mean, one, the fact that he's not nominated, I haven't seen him get nominated anywhere for this. He's rarely mentioned. Somebody made the comment on Twitter that they were kind of insulted that he was basically, and this isn't an insult about Sally Hawkins, but that he was basically Sally Hawkins plus one at the Golden Globes, which is kind of insult to his talent and the very hard work he goes into making the films he makes, especially with Guillermo del Toro. But yeah, he's been in 6 of del Toro's films. He was in del Toro's second film, Mimic, in a very small part for a few days. He was in Hellboy, Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy 2, Crimson Peak, and then this one. So pretty much once he had a major role in Hellboy, there's only in one film that he was not used in, and that was Pacific Rim. He's been in the majority of his films by this point. Del Toro has made the joke, well, partially a joke, that basically he will put him in anything that he can. To move away from him for a second, I mean, I'm a big Del Toro fan. He's one of my favorite directors. I follow him very closely. I go to see every movie that he's done. I have seen every movie that he's done. Again, I just did a whole podcast about him. You're right that this is a very good-looking movie, and that's true of basically all of his movies. They're always very good-looking, no matter his main cinematographer that he's done most of his films with. He didn't work with on this one or his last film, but it's still a really great cinematographer. He's a director who's very intentional with everything he does. He's been commented before by people who know him very well or who have worked with him, in that he basically has the whole film in his head, and all it's really doing is he's filming it. He's very exact. Everything that you see in a frame, from the composition to how the set is designed to the colors that he's using, all are there to get across the story or the themes or the characters or whatever. Everything is there for a reason. And you mentioned Creature of the Black Lagoon. That was a major reason he wanted to do this film, because as a kid he wanted to see the creature get with the leading lady, and he's a big into old monster movies. He's big into literature. He's a very smart guy, puts references to all that stuff in his movies all the time. So I want to make it clear that I am very, very fond of him as a director. I think he's a great director. I am so happy that he is getting even, I mean, he got a lot of praise for Pan's Labyrinth, but he's getting even more somehow for Shape of Water. I'm very, very happy about that. If he wins Best Director, I would love that. I think he deserves it. He works his ass off on films. I don't know if he will win or not. I think any other year he probably would, but with stuff about Greta Gerwig and Jordan Peele and all that stuff, I don't know. This isn't for me. It's certainly not my most favorite of his work. I'll be honest, and I mentioned this with the last podcast, and that guest I think had a similar point of view. It didn't hit either of us, I think, as much as it's hitting other people. We didn't connect to it in the same way as other people are. I don't know why that is. I've only seen the movie once. I saw it back in December. I saw it in Chicago. I was able to see an early-ish screening of it, but for some reason, I think it. Yeah, again, it's a beautiful-looking movie. It's has a lot of great actors in it. It has this great theme of all of our hero characters are people who kind of outcast from normal society in a way because Sally Hawkins is mute. Doug Jones's character is obviously this amphibian creature, godlike being. Richard Jenkins, and this isn't really giving anything away, he's gay. The stuff going on with the Michael Stuhlbarg character. Octavia Spencer is a black woman in the 1960s. They're all outcasts in a certain way, and Guillermo del Toro loves probably what he does, and I think in every one of his movies, he highlights the outcast characters because that's who he relates to. And he kind of almost has to relate to it because he's that himself, because he likes doing horror movies and stuff that people don't really give a crap about. He puts a lot of passion into. So there's a lot of things I recommend about this movie, but yeah, it didn't affect me in an emotional way that other people are. So I guess in that sense, I don't really get it, but I'm happy for any praise he gets for the movie.
Okay. I really, really enjoyed this film. It's the most nominated film at the Oscars this year with 13 total nominations. This is easily one of the films you can talk about the most. You can say everything you want. I think there's great themes. I think it tackles big issues. I think that it stays very contained within its own magical universe. And I say magical universe because there's magical elements to it. Otherworldly elements are a part of this. Here's the thing. If anybody other than Guillermo del Toro directed this script, this film wouldn't even be remotely close to as good as it actually is. This is a vision he had. This is a passion project that he had. I'm not saying that every look, okay, directors take on films because these take up almost 2 years of their lives. People need to understand that. They're all passion projects in a way. But I know that Guillermo del Toro is, I love to say this, he's one of us, man. He's a nerd. He's a nerd. He's a dreamer. He's the type of guy that somehow has found a way to create things that come right out of his brain and they leap right onto a screen. I'm glad that he's getting this kind of attention. I don't know if I think this is the best picture of the year. I genuinely don't think that it is. But I think going into Oscar Sunday where we're sitting right now, this film I think has the most steam right now. There may only be one other film that might dethrone this, and that's the last film we're going to discuss, I think. But the thing about The Shape of Water for me is that it is a beautifully told story. It is a love story. It is a story about a time period in America where prejudices were at an all-time high in terms of the social climate, and the society was on the verge of starting to break down barriers, but it hadn't just yet. And at the same time, it appeals to like a sort of an espionage thriller type movie while also being a very simple story. Do you know what I mean? Like simple in a good way. Like it's just an everyday average person in Sally Hawkins' character, Eliza, is about to embark on an adventure that clearly she's wanted her whole life. But it's not about that. She starts to feel things that she's never felt before. And she starts to be looked at in a way she's never been looked at before. I also appreciated that the film made its characters seem very real. And I think that in the end, when the credits were rolling, I was like, well, damn, that was really good. That was really well executed. But I didn't think it was the best picture of the year. I just didn't. And I don't know why I still feel that way. Like my gut instinct is just telling me likelihood is pointing to it taking home that trophy. Okay, Guillermo won Best Director at the DGAs, so all indications and steam going in say otherwise to my gut, but it isn't the best picture of the year. It just isn't.
I would agree with you. Again, I won't be disappointed if it wins because I think Guillermo del Toro deserves it. He deserves the praise and blah blah blah. I don't know if it will, just because again it is. I don't know. Maybe they're trying to get better at this, but it's still a genre movie, and the Academy, by tradition, usually doesn't like or award genre movies. It's lucky if they get nominations at all. The fact that we have a movie like Get Out and Shape of Water being nominated, and the fact that we have two movies like that are being nominated, I think is great. And I don't know. I'm almost willing to let it win if it means that if. I mean, I felt a similar way about, not quite the same way, but about La La Land last year. I would like a musical to win Best Picture again every now and then because they rarely win anymore at all. And I would love for a movie like this, genre film, to win. I mean, I feel kind of bad saying that because I don't want a movie just to win just before that reason. I want it to be because it's the best film, at least out of the ones that have been nominated. But just to finally have a film like that to win, because I mean the only closest one that's like that is Lord of the Rings, and besides that there hasn't really been anything that genre based that has won.
No, I agree with you. It's not a likely scenario. that a genre film will win Best Picture, but if it was ever going to do it, I think it's going to be The Shape of Water because of all the steam that it's just gathered.
I will suggest something that my guest in the last show, Del Toro show, did. He said that he loved rewatching Del Toro films because you always spot new things, or he always spotted new things. So he suggested that. Watched his films multiple times. He also suggested, and I can support this as well, pick up his art of books of his films. Because you'll see, one, all the work that they put in
Yep.
designing these movies, but also things like he mentioned something in Crimson Peak about the main character in that film at certain points to make her feel small and kind of overwhelmed. They put her in oversized furniture. Not in a obvious way, but in a subtle way that just adds to the movie and to the character. So he does a lot of stuff that you don't necessarily notice, but again, everything is exact. He does everything for a reason. He doesn't put anything in his films that isn't there for a purpose. Down to every aspect of his films, they're there for a reason. So yeah, pick up his art of books, rewatch his films, listen to his audio commentaries. He's very interesting to listen to, and just experience his films because he's a very unique director who again is just finally getting, I think, the credit he deserves.
I think of every Best Picture nominee, The Shape of Water was made by someone who wants to watch the movie. And I'm not saying that Paul Thomas Anderson makes his movies as like torture exercises. I'm saying that like Guillermo del Toro is a movie lover. And he is a man who professes his love for movies every time he makes one, or every time he works on some kind of small project, even. The thing about this movie is that I think he made a movie that he wanted to watch because nobody else had ever done it. And that, I think, is one of the unique factors of the way he makes movies versus a lot of other directors. I'm not saying that Chris Nolan didn't make Dunkirk because he wanted to. I'm not saying the same thing applies to him, but what I'm getting at is I imagine all of these directors as being very passionate about their projects, but I see Guillermo del Toro every day he arrives on set being like a kid in a candy store. He loves to make movies, and it's so apparent in the movies that he makes. And he wants to take you somewhere. He wants to take you somewhere, and
Yeah.
he does it effortlessly, it seems, because
Right.
he's going with you.
Another thing about Del Toro, he never will make a film ever that he doesn't want to make. He only makes films that he wants to make. He never and will never phone it in. He puts 150% into every film he does because he wants to see it on screen. And you can't say that about a lot of directors. A lot of directors, even ones I love, at some point I think have done films that I think they might have been phoning it in a little bit. But I can't say that about Del Toro. He always is making a film that he wants to make. And I think that's one of his best qualities because he just puts his best effort into it. And I mean, yeah, there's always something good to say about his films. Okay, so for the last film that we're talking about today is going to be Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. A woman named Mildred, who is played by Frances McDormand, doesn't think the police of Ebbing, Missouri are doing enough to solve the rape and murder of her teenage daughter that happened 7 months prior to when this film begins. So she pays for some ad space on three billboards that are just outside of town that are basically pushing the sheriff of this town, played by Woody Harrelson, to work harder on solving this case. The sheriff, sections of the town that are supportive of the sheriff, and a racist officer played by Sam Rockwell are not very happy with this development, and they try to get her to take the billboards down. Mildred refuses to do that, which kind of sets off a mini war with the police and her, and there's some surprises in there as well. So I think, and you would probably agree with me with this is probably one of the big contenders for Best Picture. And this film, for me, is kind of a mixed bag, I have to admit. I think Sam Rockwell, who I love in just about anything he does, I think he's a fantastic actor. I love that he's been nominated for this film. I really like his performance and his role in this movie. I think Woody Harrelson does a great job. Frances McDormand is okay. Well, she probably does the part fine. I just probably don't like her character as much because she's very, not grating, but she's a tough person to be around, I would assume. It's not an easygoing person by any means. But again, a person you don't always, I think, like either. But my main thing about this movie, and I wish I could give an example of this because that would make me a better film critic if I could describe this better, but for some reason, and I might have to see the movie again to understand why, and maybe I wouldn't even feel this way about the movie if I saw it again, but when I saw the film, it didn't feel quite genuine to me in the fact that it didn't quite feel like, I don't want to say it felt like an Oscar bait film. It wasn't like a movie like Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which was very Oscar baity and kind of somewhat manipulative and all that stuff. It's not like that, which is just a movie that's being put out there just to win an Oscar, but there's an element to it where it just doesn't quite feel right to me. I don't feel that what I'm seeing on screen, it just feels a bit put on. It doesn't feel as real to me as I think it's should have. It doesn't feel as sincere as I think it should have. I know I'm probably very alone in that fact. I know this is being very lauded film by many people, but I don't know. It just didn't quite work for me. I mean, there are sections of the film that work quite well for me, but as a whole, I just felt that it could have been better. I mean, I think your opinion is going to be different, so.
I mean, here's the thing. This is written and directed by Martin McDonagh, who is an Oscar winner. He won for a short film called Six Shooter. He was also nominated a couple of years later for writing In Bruges, which is one of my favorite films. This was the movie I was most hyped for all of 2017. It really was, because he's only made 2 full-length films and a short. The big thing for me is that I think McDermott, this is the best actress performance of the year. This is it. And I know you said like you didn't really like her character that much. I really try not to judge the quality of a performance on whether I like the character or not.
No, I'm not.
And it's hard to delineate with no, but here's the thing. It's hard to delineate with this character of Mildred Hayes. It's very hard because she comes out swinging like this badass, grief-stricken mother who is not going to take no for an answer. And then the film depicts what I can only describe as a downward spiral towards damnation. Whereas you have on the other side of this aisle, proverbial aisle, you have the Sam Rockwell character who you hate from the get-go because he's this racist cop who, rumor has it, beat up a black suspect that was in custody, and it has just sort of let his badge go to his head, and he's a drunk, and he hates people that aren't like him. He even insults Peter Dinklage's character because Peter Dinklage is in this movie. The reason why this movie works so well for me is because what is a downward spiral for one is an ascension from the depths of just shit for another, and they meet in the middle. And I think where this movie doesn't work for a lot of people is that the way it ends, it's open-ended, and for some reason, and you're fine with that, and I'm fine with that, but for some reason, a lot of people still don't like open-ended endings. They like to have everything tied up with a damn bow. As a playwright, McDonagh doesn't subscribe to that. He will write the ending that he feels fits the characters and the story that he's been telling. I think that this movie tackles everything else that some of the other films in this category tackle. I think it tackles racism. I think it tackles general prejudices against class. I think that it tackles prejudices against people of short stature. I think that it tackles homophobia. I think that this movie was the movie that not only tackles and depicts, but calls out all of the issues that plague society today through the lens of a small town where a horrific crime was committed against a young woman. So again, now you're in the feminist category of tackling issues. And I think that what its ambitious attempt to do, and the movie that I saw, was an unapologetic middle finger toward a lot of issues that this country cannot seem to get beyond. And these characters were the most human ensemble of characters I saw in any film this year in 2017. And in the end, like, I think that the amount of praise, which by the way, 7 Oscar nominations for this film, I think that the amount of praise that this film has received is a bit surprising, even to the filmmakers. I mean, I think they had a goal, they had an ambition, they set out to make this movie. Nothing surprised me in this film, and everything felt like this was calling out a lot of problems that exist within our society. And so for me, and I'm not saying this is what wins Best Picture, this is why it is the best picture of the year, because I think that what some of these other films picked 1 or 2 of these issues to tackle, and it tackled them excellently, like very well. Get Out, Shape of Water, you know, even look at something like Lady Bird, The Post, all of these things. Every one of the key elements that those other films tackled, this film tackles all of them all at once, tells stories of redemption, tells stories of degradation, tells stories of raw, unapologetic just behavior that is human and flawed. And you just have this litany of occurrences that lead to you, an audience member, in the end questioning everything. That's how the movie ends. The audience should be questioning everything. No other movie that came out last year does that. None. And no other movie that I've seen in the last 5 or 6 years has done that. So for me, this is Best Picture, flaws and all. But it probably won't win because I still think The Shape of Water is... it's got more steam. It's just got more steam. But I don't think it's a matter of quality of film.
Obviously, you like the movie more than I did. I wouldn't say people shouldn't see the film. I think it's interesting. I think people should see it. Out of the films that are likely to win Best Picture, this being one of them, it's the one that I kind of hope... I feel bad saying this because I don't want to say this about a film, but I kind of hope doesn't win just because, I don't know. On a personal level, it just didn't work for me. And I think there are better films this year that could win, but at the same time, it's getting a lot of praise. Will it win? I don't know, but I think it has a very good chance of winning.
It was just the most ambitious thing I saw. And I think that if I were in a time where we're ready to talk about issues as a society, I think this is a film that depicts small town living in a bubble. It shows right and wrong. It shows conversations starting What I think is the biggest case for Three Billboards to win the Oscars boils down to the fact that the script was just unapologetic, and it hangs dirty laundry out on the line, and it wants you to interact with it. And I think that more so than any other film in this category, I mean, you know, we kind of talked about it. The Shape of Water has this cadre of characters that are all different. I mean, you had a black woman in the 60s who faced prejudice every day at work. You got a gay man who has to live in the closet for the most part, except around certain people that know that he's a gay man. You have Get Out that's tackling racism head on, okay? And it does it in a very smart, funny, dark way that I think instills hope in its resolution. You got Lady Bird, who's dealing with young women having the strength to do what they feel is right. And you've got something like The Post, which is battling this idea that the news media is just full of shit. This is the Oscar year of issues. Like, they have just done a very good job of picking films that tackle everything. And if that's the theme, if that's the core theme of what this category is mixed with, then I think you've got to go with the film that just hits everything like a damn truck with a cinder block on the gas pedal. And I think that of those films, Three Billboards is the one that does it. I'm not going to be mad if it loses, okay? Because I don't necessarily know that it's going to win. But I had this gut instinct that, much like I did with Moonlight, I'm just kind of like, you know what? I think that one deserves it more than any of the others, because I think that it had the balls or the nuts or whatever you want to say. I think it had the gumption to stand on a soapbox and loudly proclaim that human beings are flawed. And I think that they are now ready to begin accepting their flaws and moving forward as a society. That's what I thought Three Billboards did for me, on top of being a very intimate story about a grieving mother and a racist cop. This has been a spirited discussion about a spirited film that is also having spirited discussion. So, and I don't mean that in like a confrontational way. It's just, I'm glad that people have been talking about Three Billboards. I really am, because I just think this movie said more than all the rest.
Okay, so that about wraps us up for today. Before we completely wrap up, Blake and I are going to kind of give you our ranking of where the films are for us personally. So I'll go first. So I have a tie somewhere in my list, so mine actually starts at number 8. My number 8 is Phantom Thread. And I should say my list anyway is based off of an objective viewpoint and a subjective viewpoint. So in terms of what I think, how well the film was made, based off of also just how I felt about it personally. So Phantom Thread, I think it's a very well made film. There's some stuff I like about it, but I just found it a very unpleasant experience. So it's rated lower than my number 7, Call Me By Your Name, which I thought I didn't like as much, but it didn't have as much of an emotional reaction for me. So number 6 was The Post, which I think had a lot going for it, but ultimately was just underwhelming and didn't match, I think, the hopes I was having for it going in. I think it had a lot of potential that was just wasted. The Shape of Water, movie by a director, is my number 5, and that's by a director who I love and who I would love to get all the accolades he can get, but just didn't hit me as personally as it did others. So it's just hard for me to, as much as it looks great and it's designed great and it's a lot of stuff going for it, it just doesn't hit me emotionally as much as other films, so I can't rate it that high. Three Billboards, a lot of things I like about it in terms of Woody Harrelson, Sam Rockwell, and certain elements of the story I really got into, and it can be really funny, but ultimately I just, again, it didn't feel quite as, for some reason, like, and I can't explain, it just didn't feel quite as genuine as the films in my top 3. So my number 3 was Get Out, which I would probably watch Three Billboards over Get Out, but that's only because Get Out is such an intense movie that I just couldn't watch it all the time. But I think Get Out is more of a personal story, and again, it seemed more genuine, so I had to put that higher. Number 2 is a tie between Darkest Hour and Dunkirk. Darkest Hour, I put that high just because Gary Oldman is so good in it. I just loved him so much in it, and again, this is probably maybe the film I enjoyed the most out of all of these films. But it is very traditional in certain senses, and again, isn't saying anything terribly new, but it's tied with Dunkirk because it is doing something a bit more different and stuff like that. But I would maybe watch Darkest Hour over Dunkirk, but they both have positives that I can't separate, so I have to kind of place them as a tie because they're just kind of equal to me for different reasons. And then Lady Bird I just loved because Saoirse Ronan's great in it, Laurie Metcalf is great in it. I love the story, I love the point of view, I loved how fresh it felt, and it was just different from stuff I've seen lately, and I just have to love it for that. So Blake, how's your ranking go?
Well, when you said, let's rank the Best Picture nominees, I've been saying, and I keep going back to this whole thing because I try to predict the Oscars, win or lose. This is more how I rank the movies. This does not have anything to do, just like how you said, this is not really how I think it's going to go Oscar-wise. This is just how I rank these nominees. And we have some similarities. Start number 9, I went with Darkest Hour. I feel like it's just so heavily weighed upon Gary Oldman to carry that film. I'm not saying that it's not a really good movie. It is. Amongst all of these, I don't see it being better than the rest. But hey, if it's the 9th best movie I saw last year, that's fine. That's pretty good because I saw quite a few. Number 8, I got to go with The Post because I feel like it wasn't as ambitious as it could have been as a film. I think it had a strong ensemble. I think it had a really great director in the chair telling the story. I think it had a place. But I also think because of how the movie takes that severe left turn, as we mentioned earlier, and gets very contemporary in its the press is to serve the governed, not the governing preachy moment. I think that if the film had come out 2 years ago, I think it would have a better place in terms of being a little more appreciated. Number 7 for me is Call Me By Your Name. There is great beauty in this film. There really is. I can't deny it. I went through the whole thing about how I have issues with the script and, I didn't think the chemistry was as good as it could have been, but it still sticks with me because of that scene with Michael Stahlberg. And I felt like it was a very intimate film without having a great intimacy. I think that it could have gone a little deeper at times, but I still think that it stayed isolated in its own world. Number 6 for me is Phantom Thread. I felt like this was an auteur's film. I thought this was a great film despite its small scale. I thought that it was an intimate film in a big way. And I think that while it was irksome at times and there were hard characters to enjoy and it got a little dark, like really dark, but also stayed very funny at other times. Number 6, I think, is a fair spot for it because I don't want it to be forgotten, but I don't know who I would recommend it to. Lady Bird is my number 5. Greta Gerwig made a splash. What a film. Great performance from Laurie Metcalf. Great performance from Saoirse Ronan. The rest of the ensemble was damn good in their own right. Wonderful take on the coming of age of a young woman, especially in a time where we need great films written and directed by women to get a chance to shine. But amongst these, I didn't feel like it was better than Get Out, and Get Out is my number 4. I think that Get Out is the movie that stuck with me the most throughout the year. It was very well executed. I think it takes a lot of good modern issues to task. I think it was funnier than a movie of its ilk could have been. I think that the suspense and horror was very well executed. And at the same time, I think that all the acting in the film was just phenomenal. And Jordan Peele, much like Greta Gerwig, I think Big Splash, I think that both of them are directors I'm going to watch for in the future. But what debuts from 2 great artists. Now we're into the top 3. I got to go with Dunkirk. Dunkirk is the movie that I thought was the masterpiece of 2017, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I think it was the best film of 2017. I think that it was a true exercise in mastercraft filmmaking. It definitely felt like a action thriller that was nonstop with brief moments to catch your breath, and it just kept going with the heart pounding. Masterful editing, wonderful direction, beautiful cinematography, practical filmmaking with planes, boats, and everything in between. I was in love with that movie. And then came The Shape of Water, my number 2. Guillermo, I think we talked about him more than any other director in this category, and rightfully so. He definitely made a film in a world that I wanted to visit. He made a film that I think tackled issues that need to be discussed. He made a beautiful film, a romance film that is a romance film first and a suspense, horror, sci-fi film second. And at the same time, there's a lot of whimsy in the film. You can get lost in the cheerfulness of certain elements of this film. And another thing is that beautifully acted from start to finish. And number 1, I think we said it because I was coming into it. It was the last movie we talked about. 3 Billboards, man. I'm stunned at how unapologetic and blunt that movie was. I think that, like many of the other films nominated, of these 9, it tackled issues, but I think that it not only tackled them, I think it hit them with a running clothesline. I think that it's important to sometimes put despicable things on a screen. Here's the thing. When it did it, it wasn't distasteful. So that's the reason I think for me why I'm just so hooked by it. I think that if I were going to pick my favorite film of the year, it would be 3 Billboards. I think that I could easily recommend it to somebody and I could say it might make you uncomfortable at times, but I feel like we could have a really great conversation after you watch it. So 3 Billboards for me is the most human batch of characters I saw all year. It was laugh out loud funny. It was cringeworthy dark at times. And I really kind of started to hate characters I loved by the end of it, and I loved characters I hated by the end of it. So there's just so much going on with that movie that if it's not apparent to every audience member out there, then maybe I just went in and experienced something unique for me, and that's okay. But 3 Billboards stands out for me amongst all the others.
So what, Blake, do you think out of the ones that you listed? What do you because there's some films we've talked about like Darkest Hour, which we both enjoyed, or other films that we've enjoyed that we don't necessarily think are going to win the award. But what are the films that you think are most likely, are the top contenders that you really think have the possibility of winning?
For Best Picture, it's Dunkirk, Shape of Water, Three Billboards. And that's based on what I think of the films. It's based on the awards steam that they have coming into the show. It's everything. But at the same time, I would love to see something like a Get Out win. I sadly don't feel that any of the other 5 films have even the slightest chance. This year, I think it is tough. I think it's genuinely hard. I mean, dude, the last few years I've been watching these award shows and I'm just like, oh, well, I think this is going to win. Then typically they do. And when they announced La La Land last year, like I told at the beginning of this podcast, I was like, I didn't think, no way, no way. And then lo and behold, that ain't what happened. Like it turned around and it ended up being Moonlight. And look, this is not about my gratification. This is just like, I don't know, like my instincts are just saying that there's going to be The Shape of Water with an upset by Three Billboards, and the upset of upsets would be Dunkirk pulling it off. And that's it. Other than that, Get Out would be a wonderful upset, but I don't think it's going to happen. Lady Bird, I don't think has a chance at Best Picture. Phantom Thread, no way. Call Me by Your Name, no way. The Post, no way. Darkest Hour, no way. I think it's easy to narrow the field to those big 3. And other than that, I think anything could happen.
Mine is a bit different in terms of I don't think Dunkirk will win. Again, I could win some of his other categories like
Yeah,
director,
totally.
editing, and stuff like that. I don't think it'll win Best Picture. Mine would be The Shape of Water is one, Three Billboards is definitely one, and I would say Get Out and Lady Bird have a good shot, just because, again, and argue whether this is a good reason for them to win or not. But again, we're still very fresh off. I mean, we're talking a lot. Hollywood and the United States, I think, in general, is talking a lot about opportunities for African Americans, opportunities for women. Again, the whole sexual harassment thing was going on and all that stuff. So they're very much in, especially women, are very much in people's minds right now. So I think Get Out could win just because we want more representation. We want more of those types of films to win. Again, whether it should win just for that reason, you can argue that. I don't think it should win just because of that, but I think the Academy could give it to it just because of that reason. And Lady Bird could win because it's about women. It's directed by and written by a woman. So it could win to give some accolades to women filmmakers. So I think those make them as likely. I mean, I'm pulling for Lady Bird, but yeah, it very well could be Three Billboards or Shape of Water. But I really don't know. I really, really don't know. Especially between Three Billboards and Shape of Water. I could see it going either way, but because I would like to say Three Billboards would definitely win, just because again, it's not a genre movie. In that sense, it's more likely based on tradition. But I don't know, with the way the Academy is going, there's been a bit of a shift, and Shape of Water is getting so much buzz. I really don't know. I really, really don't.
Right.
So I'm gonna be kind of on pins and needles waiting for that award to be announced.
I think that there is a genuine excitement this year to how that category is going to play out. And I'm all the happier for it, honestly, because I'm tired of having an inkling or having a good sense of what's going to win, and then it just wins, and it's like, cool, no suspense there, like there's nothing to it. But I think this year there is, and I'm happy about it, and I hope that there's certain categories that I am very much right about, but Best Picture is the one that I'm the least attached to in terms of like my pick. Like I genuinely don't care who wins it as long as it's one of the 3 that I mentioned to you. And there's 9 nominees, man. Like it could be any one of those 3 and I'd be happy. I think it's going to be one. I hope it's another. I wouldn't be upset if it was this one. Like that's the easiest way to, and I don't want to sound like it's a cop out. It's just this one I think is a little harder to predict than it has been in the past, which should lead for an exciting moment if it's not screwed up by a misannouncement like it was last year.
I think it's safe to say that they're going to be watching things pretty closely to make sure that doesn't happen ever again.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, so that wraps us up for today. Like Blake and I mentioned, we're really eager to see what wins. If you have opinions on what you think will win or not win, or about the films we've talked about, please mention it in the comments. Otherwise, I think the next episode is a bit up in the air at the moment. I will be taking probably a bit of a break from the podcast just to catch up on other videos, but the next one is possibly the second part to the Marx Brothers films that I talked about last year. If I decide to do that, that might come out at the beginning of April. If not, at the very least, there will be the Han Solo discussion I'm going to have in May, so you can look forward to that. Otherwise, I will see you guys later.
You can find me on Twitter at CinemaPackRats. Links to my WordPress and YouTube account, where you can find film and television news and reviews, can be found in the episode's description.